Good morning. I'm Tim Gerdeman, Vice Chair and Co-founder and Chief Marketing Officer of Water Tower Research. I'm being joined today for this special WTR Small Cap Spotlight Flashcast by my colleague and Senior Research Analyst, Robert Sassoon, to discuss his three recent research reports on neuroscience, Alzheimer's, and Biogen. Robert, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me again.
Robert, such CNS-related diseases as neurological and psychiatric disorders are arguably the most challenging indications to treat and for which progress towards finding solutions has been slow. But as you explain in your Neurosciences report titled The Neurosciences Comeback, which can be found on Water Tower Research's open access website, things are starting to look up for the many millions of people affected by these diseases. Can you summarize the key innovations that are starting to give people more hope, please?
Yeah, so Tim, you referenced in your question, CNS diseases are some of the toughest targets in drug development. Unfortunately, they affect a lot of people. According to the World Health Organization, approaching 3.5 billion people around the world are afflicted by some type of neurological or psychiatric disorder. So CNS disorders are, and there are more than 600 different types of CNS disorders that have been identified thus far, are definitely a high unmet medical need with a heavy human and economic toll to society. So the greater the need to find the more effective solutions that we have currently. So at the core of the challenge to develop effective treatments for these disorders is the fact that no organ in the body is more complex than the brain. You're dealing with billions of neurons. In fact, there are 8.6 billion neurons or 86 billion neurons, all accounted for, and trillions of interconnections susceptible to multiple disease mechanisms, multifactorial disorders, and all with high patient variability. So as a result of this complexity, there's an incomplete understanding of the workings of the brain. Now we have, on top of that, we have diagnostic challenges and the challenge of developing precision medicines to breach the blood-brain barrier. The brain happens to be the only organ in your body that has a personal security system, and that's for good reason. So we also know that drug development generally is a high-risk venture, but all these factors that I've mentioned mean that the odds of getting CNS-related drug developments to approval are even lower than the biotech average, and we've seen plenty of costly late-stage clinical trial failures in the CNS area. All this has left the development of CNS-targeted therapies, by and large, limited to symptomatic treatments rather than tackling the underlying causes. So over the last 3 decades, CNS drug development has really lagged far behind the advances made in other major therapeutic areas such as oncology and immunotherapy. However, the good news is that in more recent years, we've seen an accelerated advancement of innovative technologies and therapeutic strategies in the neurosciences, which have created the grounds for much more optimism that the barriers to the development of more effective treatments for CNS diseases can be overcome. So, for example, we've seen major advances in neuroimaging with the development of high-resolution MRI machines, which can identify distinct types of neurons and their interactions with the brain, providing a more nuanced understanding of neural circuitry, which is the key to getting a better understanding of how the brain works. We're also seeing the growing integration of AI and machine learning tools in neuro research, which significantly enhances the ability to analyze vast amounts of complex data and identify intricate patterns and providing better diagnostic and treatment tools for neurological disorders. And these advancements have actually contributed to the increased number of biomarker discoveries for different CNS orders. So a major advance in biomarker discovery of neurodegenerative diseases has been the development of blood-based biomarkers. For example, p-tau biomarkers for Alzheimer's, which is as a diagnostic tool, more cost-effective and more efficient than PET scans and much less invasive and significantly more convenient for the patient than lumbar punctures. We've also seen several new technologies developed that facilitate CNS drug targeting and delivery across the blood-brain barrier without wreaking permanent damage to it, to modified agent transporting systems to allow molecules that could not otherwise get through the barrier to reach their specified targets in the brain. So these advancements have enabled development pipelines for disease-modifying treatments for CNS disorders to evolve and expand considerably in recent years. And indeed, we've witnessed the approval of the first disease-modifying treatments for Alzheimer's in the last couple of years, which marks, I think, a watershed moment for Alzheimer's patients and the neurosciences. One caveat to make is that when we talk about disease-modifying drugs, at this stage, we're limiting that to slowing disease progression rather than curing the disease. But there's much more confidence today than, say, even 5 years ago, that ongoing advancements will make discovering the holy grail of curative solutions for currently incurable CNS disorders achievable, and perhaps sooner than one might think.
That's both fascinating and exciting. So let's now move on and turn to a specific neurological disease, Alzheimer's. This and other neurodegenerative diseases have until now been considered intractable. Robert, can you fill us in on what developments are occurring in Alzheimer's and how the treatment landscape for that indication is evolving?
Sure, Tim. So Alzheimer's was a disease that was first identified about 120 years ago. But success in finding effective treatments for the disease has proved pretty elusive due to the complex pathology of the disease. So it was only in the 1990s that the first drugs came to market. And even then, prior to 2021, amid high clinical trial failure rates, the FDA had only approved four drugs, all of them treating the symptoms rather than the underlying causes. However, the good news is that the treatment landscape has significantly evolved since 2021, with the FDA approving the first disease-modifying drugs in Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's has been a prime example where increased knowledge and scientific advancement have helped better understand the disease's etiology, which has allowed the first DMTs to be developed to treat the world's most prevalent neurodegenerative disease. Now, in this regard, Biogen has been a pioneer with 2 of the 3 approved DMTs, although one of them, Aduhelm, was discontinued last year amid questions over its efficacy and undesirable side effects resulting in low physician take-up of the drug. So it has not been by any means a straightforward path. There are currently 2 DMTs for Alzheimer's available: Biogen's Leqembi, which is a collaboration with Japan's Eisai, and Eli Lilly's Kisunla, which was granted FDA approval last year. Now, while there are differences in their mechanisms of action, both these drugs have similarities in they are monoclonal antibodies targeting the reduction of amyloid beta plaques, with the goal of slowing disease progression in patients with early-stage Alzheimer's and mild cognitive impairment. Now, I call the approval of these DMTs a watershed moment for Alzheimer's patients and neurosciences. This is not necessarily because these drugs in themselves are transformative for Alzheimer's patients, but both Leqembi and Kisunla are estimated to slow disease progression by about 6 months during the early stages of the disease, which all said and done really represents a meaningful but still very modest extension of cognitive function. Arguably, though, I would say the greater importance of these 2 first DMTs for Alzheimer's is that they are a springboard for the development of more effective classes of DMTs for Alzheimer's in the future. Indeed, the development pipeline for Alzheimer's has evolved very quickly and is dominated by next-generation novel DMTs. For two points to make here are that, 1, the expanding number of next-generation developments have broaden their pathological targets beyond accumulation of amyloid beta plaques and tau tangles, which are the most established pathological hallmarks of the disease, to other therapeutic targets, including neuroinflammation, neuroprotection, neurogenesis, and proteostasis, which is the regulation of overexpression of other proteins that are seen to be causes of Alzheimer's. The second point I'd like to make is that while much of the development focuses on the early stage of Alzheimer's, there is now an expanding focus on preclinical Alzheimer's. And there are several companies actively developing biomarkers and therapies for preclinical Alzheimer's, including Biogen and Eli Lilly. So if successful, these developments, I would say, would be nothing less than transformational and the key to unlock the treatment box for this disease. And it's been hypothesized that the onset of Alzheimer's can actually start as early as 20 years before the first signs of the disease manifest themselves. So while about 50 million Alzheimer's while about 50 million people worldwide are diagnosed with Alzheimer's, there are estimates that indicate that the number of people with a proclivity to develop Alzheimer's at a later stage exceeds 300. Now, not all of them will actually develop Alzheimer's, but that's the potential universe. As they say, prevention is better than cure.
Absolutely. So you just mentioned Biogen as a pioneer in the Alzheimer's treatment market, and I know you recently initiated coverage of the company, Robert. What are the key drivers for Biogen moving forward?
So Biogen built its reputation of being a breakthrough drug developer using an innovative modality-agnostic approach to address complex and intractable diseases. So this approach yielded the company's golden era, which lasted about 20 years from the mid-1990s to the late 2010s. And during that period, Biogen really enjoyed an unrivaled leadership in the disease-modifying treatment of multiple sclerosis, which is a CNS-based autoimmune disease. But as soon as its patents began to expire, that era was really effectively over, as the entry of generics and more efficacious next-generation treatments began to erode revenue from its MS franchise. So despite succeeding in getting the first breakthrough disease-modifying drugs for Alzheimer's approved, as we mentioned earlier, efforts to build a franchise that could rival or even surpass its MS franchise have not yet paid off as it had hoped. The discontinuation of Aduhelm and the slow initial launch of Leqembi, blamed on infrastructural bottlenecks, particularly in the US, have been major setbacks to that goal. And Biogen's revenue trajectory has been basically in reverse gear since 2019. In late 22, Biogen replaced its CEO, triggering a shift in strategy. So although Alzheimer's remains a core target indication, principally through Leqembi, under its current leadership, the focus has now been on streamlining costs and on increasing efforts to diversifying the pipeline, specifically targeting the underserved areas of rare disease and immunology to avoid over-reliance on its high-risk Alzheimer's program. That process has been accelerated in the last couple of years by a couple of key strategic acquisitions in those therapeutic areas. So the turnaround strategy that is being executed is not really a quick fix for Biogen. Biogen provided guidance of a mid-single-digit drop in revenue for 2012, which will make it its sixth consecutive year of revenue decline. And we expect continuing revenue decline in 2026 before a modest pickup in 2027. We also expect a flattish trajectory for non-GAAP EPS over that period. But even though Biogen has been absence of growth for a multi-year period, one important factor in its favor is that the company has managed its balance sheet pretty responsibly through this time. So while Biogen's management has a lot of faith in its late clinical stage pipeline and believes it represents a potential multi-billion-dollar opportunity, given the published readout timelines, I think it would be reasonable not to expect pipeline to be that impactful before the end of the decade at the earliest, and that's if all goes to plan. Biogen's comfortable financial position does give it capacity to accelerate its reprofiling from MS through acquisition. But while Biogen remains open to opportunities that offer strategic and financial value, its measured approach to M&A, characterized by financial prudence, more financial prudence than maybe many other big pharma companies, is not really expected to change. So patience seems to be the watchword with Biogen.
Great. Robert, zooming out as we wrap up here, can you talk about the company landscape in neurosciences and how investors listening into our podcast today can participate?
Sure. There are hundreds of companies involved across various aspects of neurosciences, such as drug development, diagnostics, and neurotech, some of which we have referenced in our neurosciences industry report you mentioned earlier. Historically, Big Pharma's interest in neurosciences has been fickle due to low clinical success rates and high development costs. But recent trends appear to have reignited an interest in that area for Big Pharma. Over the last 20 months or so, we've seen the likes of AbbVie, Bristol Myers Squibb, and Johnson & Johnson make sizable acquisitions in the space. And I expect the high unmet need, the trend in scientific and technological advancements, and the looming large patent cliff that many of these big pharma companies are confronting over the next 5 years will incentivize more M&A activity in that space going forward. But, neuroscience is still considered an emergent sector where exposure to any one company carries risks. So investors would have to assess each on a case-by-case basis. So for more diversified exposure, there are 2 dedicated neurosciences ETFs that are available to trade. iShares Neuroscience and Healthcare ETF, which is traded on the NYSE ARCA exchange under the ticker IBRN, and the TEMA Neuroscience and Mental Health ETF, which is trading on the NASDAQ under the ticker MNTL.
That's been really helpful. Thank you, Robert Sassoon, for letting us glean insights into how you're thinking about neuroscience, Alzheimer's, and Biogen's more specifically. To read Robert's
Thanks, Dave.
industry and company-specific equity research reports, as well as to access countless other small-cap equity research reports from Water Tower Research, please go to www.watertowerresearch.com.